I want to explain to you in sort of a nutshell the logic of Islam, and so that you can then take this knowledge and give it to others. Because, folks, we are losing the war, and we're losing it because we don't have enough people on our side. And this is kind of strange. You would think it'd be natural, given the nature of Islam and the nature of America, that we should have a natural reaction. Everybody in the United States should have a natural reaction against Islam, pretty much like we had against communism, only even worse. But it's not happening. And what I want to do tonight is show why it's not happening, and then when you understand why it's not happening, you can use that knowledge to talk to others, because we've got to get other people on our side. And so I want to explain to you the logic of Islam in a way that you can explain it to others, and then I want to motivate you to explain it to others.
People will never be safe. Remove your governments, they don't care about you.
God damn, man. You speaking on my camera, man. Oh, man.
Get back! Get back! Move back! Move back!
That's time you coming. That's long time you need to come.
And so when you hear things going on in the world and Muslim countries, all of this murder and mayhem and violent religious bigotry and anti-Semitism and anti-Christianism and homophobia, suppression of women, and the most cruel and sadistic type of murders that they keep thinking up all the time, all done in the name of Islam by religious Muslims, and they quote their sacred texts in order to support this. But of course, that is not reported by the media. We know it's Islam, but they don't, or at least they're not telling us.
Manufactured fears about Islamophobia have been weaponized to characterize all criticism of Islam as racist. But Islam is not a race. No belief system is above scrutiny, especially one as intolerant and barbarous as Islam. Back in December, I made a video called "Islam is not a religion of peace," and this was the response.
If you say one more time that Islam is not a religion of peace, I'm going to come to your house and kill you! If I found you face to face, do you want to know what I would personally do? I would actually fucking kill you, and then put the ISIS flag over your body and declare victory in the name of ISIS. I used to be one of your loyal fans on YouTube, though I find what you say about Islam to be insulting. Thus I will lay claim to your lands, and within time you will be enslaved! Jihad will never accept the Western values of your imperialism. We shall cleanse your lands with fire and steel. Your waters shall flow with blood, and your women shall serve us. I'm a proud British Muslim white male, and you know what? I find what you say about Islam offensive, and soon those words will be your last. We Muslims do not forgive easily. We will soon take over your lands, and your women belong to us all. Your white man will have only one choice: join or die. Soon you will pay for your hatred towards Islam. Your hateful nature will be met with Allah's wrath. How dare you say that Islam is not a religion of peace? I will come on your house and kill you!
Yeah, little word of advice for you fellas. You're not going to prove that Islam is a religion of peace by threatening to kill me. That kind of proves my point. What also proves my point is an entire summer of terror attacks by Islamists who in every case chant Allah Akbar and cite the Quran as the inspiration behind their rampage. The Syrian refugee suicide bomber in Germany said that his attack was a revenge act against Germans standing in the way of Islam. I guess that's nothing to do with Islam. The axe attacker on a train in Germany published a post 24 hours before his rampage saying it was an act of retribution against, quote, enemies of Islam. I guess that's nothing to do with Islam. He also said he wanted to take revenge on the infidels. I guess that's Nothing to do with Islam. ISIS gunmen in Bangladesh killed those who couldn't recite the Quran. I guess that's nothing to do with Islam. We've also had another summer of mass sexual assaults committed by Muslim migrants across Europe, which of course is nothing to do with Islam. Anyone who claims otherwise is Islamophobic. In fact, Islam is so blameless that we now have jihadists screaming Allah Akbar while stabbing Jews, and within hours it's dismissed as just someone with a mental illness. After the Nice massacre, the BBC was more concerned about, quote, anti-Islamic tweets than a guy mowing down hundreds of people with a truck in the name of Islam.
So each of these red dots is an anti-Islamic tweet coming from the UK. And that we can see happening right now, that's a digital reaction to the Nice attacks.
Do you notice how they've redefined Islamophobia as anything that's, quote, anti-Islamic? Because criticising a violent and intolerant belief system is now an act of intolerance. It's Islamophobic. They're trying to characterise genuine and warranted concern over Islamofascism as some kind of hate crime wave sweeping Europe. Because the real victims of Islamist terror are Muslims who might get mean stares on public transport.
Baby's secret, she whispers, just to you.
Allahu Akbar.
I mean, the West is so rampantly Islamophobic that Westerners view Muslims more positively than Muslims view Westerners. Okay, so if the West is so riddled with Islamophobia, why do hundreds of millions of Muslims all want to move here? I don't remember Jews being that keen on visiting Nazi Germany in the 1930s.
Holy shit! Holy shit!
But a lot of you who hear me as a terrorism analyst do not know my background and what forged this love of country and of freedom in my heart. You see, I was born and raised in Lebanon, which used to be the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. We were fair, we were open-minded, we were tolerant, we were multicultural. We prided ourselves on our multiculturalism. We had open borders. We welcomed everyone into our country because we wanted to share with them the westernization and the good life that we had created in Lebanon. Muslims used to send their children to study in our universities because we had built the best universities in the Middle East. They graduated and worked in our economy because we had built the best economy in the Middle East, even though we did not have any oil. Beirut became known as Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. Unfortunately, all that began to change very fast. You see, my 9/11 happened to me in 1975, when radical Islamists blew up my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble wounded. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I laid in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs in both arms, going from one surgery to another, I would ask my father, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because the Muslims hate us, they consider us infidels, and they want to kill us. So I learned since I was a 10-year-old little girl that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith and lived in a Christian town. Whether I practiced my religion or not, it was irrelevant in my enemy's eyes. And when you hear this type of stories, you are reminded of the Yazidis who were persecuted because of who they were as a group. Or the Armenians in the beginning of the century, when 2 million Armenians were massacred in the Middle East and Turkey, simply because of their faith and who they were. Jewish people in the crowd can relate to that because a lot of the Jews were basically slaughtered, fumigated, put in concentration camps simply because they were Jews. They could have been atheist Jews. The fact that they were Jews, they were hated just because of that simple fact. I can relate to that in a way that most Americans can't, because most Americans have never experienced persecution for who they are as a race or as a group or as a faith. But those of us who escaped tyranny to get here, who come from different parts of the world, understand persecution. We ended up leaving the hospital and coming back home. But my home was no longer the home I left. I ended up living underground in an 8 by 10 room in an underground bomb shelter, without electricity, without water, and very little food. And that's where I lived for the next 7 years of my life, from the age of 10 till the age of 17, robbed of my youth. I ended up moving to Israel and becoming a news anchor for World News based in Jerusalem from 1984 till 1989. And that's when we started seeing a rise of radical Islamic terrorism across the globe in different continents. And as I read the news as a news anchor night after night after night, I started realizing that there was a pattern developing. The name of the perpetrators were always Islamic: Ahmed, Muhammad, Hussein, Ali. The name of the victims were always Westerners, Christians and Jews. Terry Waite, Terry Anderson, Colonel Higgins, the Achille Laura, the TWA flights, the Pan Am flights. And I can go on and on. As a matter of fact, in my first book titled Because They Hate, I list pages upon pages upon pages of all the attacks committed against the West and against the United States, where America hit the snooze button and went back to sleep. And I started realizing that what I used to think was a regional problem between a majority Muslim Middle East trying to either kill or expel the minority Christians and Jews had become a worldwide problem. But the world was not paying attention. The world was not connecting the dots. The world lacked imagination. And isn't this exactly what the 9/11 Commission report said to us? We lacked imagination. 9/11 was a defining moment for the United States. It changed the way we think. It changed the way we travel. It changed the way our life. Everything changed. Now, anytime you travel, you have to take your shoes off, your belt off, your cell phone off, your big watch, your watch off, whatever. Go through security machines. We didn't have any of that before 9/11. Remember when we used to walk up straight to the gate when we had a loved one or a friend coming? The older people will remember, the young ones won't. Because unfortunately, they never had to experience that. My own children do not remember just walking up to the gate to welcome a friend. Those days are gone. September 11th changed America. It was a defining moment for the United States, but it was especially a defining moment for me. On September 11th, we all did the same thing. We were glued to our TV screens, watching the images of the World Trade Center come down again and again and again. We all were brokenhearted. We cried. We felt frustrated. We felt sad. We felt helpless. We could not believe that somebody would hijack airliners and fly them as human missiles into buildings with the intentions of killing tens of thousands of people. Thank God the planes did not hit the buildings after 9 a.m. Otherwise, they could have killed 50,000 people who work in those buildings every day. It's because they hit it before 9 a.m. that, thank God, we were able to get a lot of people out. And so unfortunate that the tragedy of the loss of 3,000 people that died, it could have been much, much worse. On that day, my 2 daughters came home from school as I was watching TV crying. And my youngest daughter, who was around my age when I was wounded in the hospital, looks at me and she says, "Mommy, why did they do this to us?" And I found myself looking into my daughter's eyes and repeating to her the exact same words my father said to me. They hate us because they consider us infidels and they want to kill us. Here we were 2 generations apart. I was a young Lebanese girl. She's a young American girl. I spoke Arabic. She speaks English. 8,000 miles apart. 2 continents apart. 30 years apart. And I had to repeat to my daughters the same words. That day was my defining moment. That's the day I vowed that I will do everything I can to make sure that my daughter will never ever have to look into her child's eyes and repeat to him or to her what my daddy said to me and what I had to say to her. That day I was reborn as an activist.
At least Paris has retained its identity, forged after the Second World War, as the intellectual capital of the world, where writers could freely express themselves without fear of recrimination, founded on the legacy of Voltaire's powerful denunciation of religious intolerance. Like when Michel Houellebecq published his 2015 book, Submission, which warned about an Islamist takeover of France. A few hours before, a bunch of Islamists massacred Charlie Hebdo cartoonists, which led to armed guards being placed out of Houellebecq's publishers, with Houellebecq himself being under the constant threat of assassination. But for a brief moment, we all cried in unison, Je suis Charlie. The freedom to offend is a fundamental part of freedom of speech, which soon turned into, oh, they probably deserved it for drawing all those horrible cartoons. Now French intellectualism is dead. Charlie Hebdo announced it would no longer draw the Prophet Muhammad, and one of its top journalists quit the magazine, saying it had gone soft on Islamist extremism. While another French intellectual, Eric Zemmour, was fined for inciting hatred against Muslims after he called the migrant crisis an invasion. But don't worry, because President Macron says that mass migration is France's destiny. I mean, it's working out great for Paris already, isn't it? So why not invite in millions more?
Let's be clear, though. Islam is not our adversary. Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism.
So many Muslim women, and the women that I interviewed for my PhD, would say that is a perversion of what Islam brings. They feel that Islam is actually something they can use to help them achieve the rights they deserve, and we should...
So infuriating that those views still exist within the Muslim community, even if it is a radical group.
Excuse me, Islam to me is the most feminist religion, right?
It's very important for us to align ourselves with the 99.9% of Muslims who are looking for the same thing we're looking for.
study Islam, we need to use special words and special terms, but it is best if they're the right ones. Islam is a totally separate civilization from ours, and it has its own separate language and its own meaning, and its word meanings are based on Islamic doctrine, and I'd like to introduce you to this concept. Let's face this, right thoughts are very difficult to have without using the right words. Now, let's give an example of using right words and wrong words. There was an attack on September 11, 2001, the so-called 9/11 attack, and there was a commission report, the 9/11 Commission Report. There were 714 mentions of Islam in the original report. Today, no terrorism report ever mentions any words that deal with Islam, and this is not the way to do business. They've created names such as terrorism, violent extremism, moderate Islam, radical Islam, moderate Muslim, radical Muslim. These terms are all subjective and have no basis in the doctrine of Islam. We need an objective naming system. And there's only one way to do that, and that is to base Islamic terms on Islamic doctrine. And by the way, if we do this, everyone will get the same result. Therefore, the method is objective. Now, everybody knows that Islam consists of submitting to Allah, and Allah is found in the Quran. And the trouble with that is the 5 pillars, which are the fundamentals of Islam, are not found in the Quran. They're hinted at, but not given in full measure. But there are 91 verses that say Muhammad is the model for every Muslim. And from that we have the Sunnah of Muhammad, his perfect life, his perfect actions, his perfect words. We have his biography in the Sirah. We have his traditions in the Hadith. We know a great deal about Muhammad. Now, let's define Islam. If I'm talking about proper terms, let's define the terms we're using. Islam is the doctrine found in Quran, Sirah, Hadith. Now get this straight. Any idea that's in Quran, Sirah, Hadith is Islam. Here's equally important. If the idea is not in Quran, Sirah, Hadith, it is not Islam. And I don't care who tells you it is. I don't care if it's the professional engineer at work or wherever else you meet another Muslim. He does not have the ability to create Islam out of his own judgment. Only what Muhammad and Allah say count. So, if an expert agrees with Allah and Muhammad, the expert is right. But if the expert disagrees with Allah and Muhammad, the expert is wrong. So, what do we need with the expert? What we need are Allah and Muhammad, and we'll use them in this talk. We want to have fact-based reasoning. The facts of Islam are Quran and Muhammad, and so therefore everything we say and think should have the basis in that. Remember, we want to have the only 2 experts that count. All questions can be answered in Quran, Sirah, Hadith. This is objective reasoning, and we can achieve objective naming. Here's bad names or poor names: radical Islam, extreme Islam, moderate Islam. But it does hint at a problem. We have 2 different kinds of Islam here, and there's a lot of arguments over which one is the real Islam. But why are there 2 different types? Well, it has to do with, guess what, Quran, Sirah, Hadith. There are 2 Islams and 2 kinds of Muslims. That is because we have 2 Qurans and 2 Muhammads. Let's go over this briefly. The early Quran written in Mecca is fairly tolerant, and if it were all that we had, we wouldn't be here having this talk. Mecca, you have your religion and I have mine. Sounds fine. Then later in Medina we have, I shall cast terror into the hearts of the Kafirs. Strike off their heads. Strike off the very tips of their fingers. Not so nice. And they're both in the Quran. But it's not only the contradiction in the Quran, there's a contradiction in Muhammad. He taught the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca and converted 150 Arabs. He was driven out of Mecca, went to Medina, where he became a politician and a jihadist, and when he died, every Arab was a Muslim. So we have 2 different people: preacher, quiet, and politician, jihadist. 2 different kinds of persons. We see this reflected about the jihad in the Quran. In the Meccan Quran, there is no jihad, whereas the Medinan Quran, 24% of it is about jihad. The Sirah, 67% of it is about jihad. The Hadith, 21%. 31% of the total trilogy deals with jihad. Jihad is not a verse or 2, it is a complete doctrine. Then we come to the Jews. In Meccan Quran, there's very little Jew hatred, and indeed, the Jews are praised as the best of people. But in the Medinan Quran, there's a great deal of Jew hatred. In the Sirah, there's a great deal of Jew hatred. In the Hadith, there's a great deal of Jew hatred. The complete trilogy, Quran, Sirah, Hadith, has more Jew hatred than Mein Kampf. Think about that. And yet, It's not the whole story, because Mein Kampf does not praise the Jews, whereas the Meccan Quran does praise them. So we have a concept which I call dualism. Two different Islams, two different Qurans, two different Muhammads. And so therefore you get into this extreme and radical and moderate. Now let's deal with something else. I'm not interested in discussing religion. What I'm interested in doing is discussing the political side of Islam, which is the Kafir side, the non-Muslim side. Oddly enough, over half the Quran, Sirah Hadith, is written about the Kafir. So therefore we need to have a language for the Kafir about Islam. The part of Islam that deals with salvation, paradise and hell, is religious. The part of Islam that deals with the Kafir is political. Well, why is that? Because the Kafirs are not in the religion. So therefore, how could they be involved with the religious concept? Political Islam is Kafir Islam. The Kafir is outside of the religion. The majority of Islam is political. We don't talk about salvation and after death. Let's talk politics. Now let's go back to the moderate, extreme, and radical. Let's get this straight. Islam is peaceful and religious. It is jihad and political. Well, wait a minute. Which is it? Peaceful and religious or jihad and political? Both statements are correct. Neither side is more or less or more real. They're used when you need them. That's dualism. Islam is Islam, and it includes both Mecca and Medina. So there is no moderate, extreme, or radical. There is simply Islam.
After every new jihadist attack against the West, politicians reassure us that the atrocity does not represent the true nature of mainstream Islam. Of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, they constantly reassure us, the overwhelming majority are as law-abiding as any members of any other monotheistic faith. Only a tiny fraction engage in terror, and Islam is a religion of peace. Furthermore, we are told the great majority of Muslims hold moderate views. But what does that mean? How moderate are moderate Muslims? Given the threat of radical Islam, it would seem to be a fair question. Let me start to answer it by telling you something of my own story. I was raised in a middle-class Muslim home in Cairo, Egypt. Growing up, I was told, among many other things, the following: that every day that passes on the Islamic nation without a caliphate is a sin, that the failures and miseries of the Muslim world started the moment we Muslims gave up conquests and wars against the infidels, that our prosperity depended on conquering new lands and converting new believers, that anyone who leaves the faith must die. And I also remember how my teachers and my mosque imams reacted to the news of 9/11 when it happened. Joy. My experience was typical, and there is data to prove it. According to the Pew Research Center, 88% of Muslims in Egypt, 62% in Pakistan, 86% in Jordan, and 51% in Nigeria believe that any Muslim who chooses to leave Islam should be put to death. Similar, if not identical numbers, are in favor of stoning people who commit adultery, severely punishing those who criticize Muhammad or Islam, and chopping off hands for theft. All of these practices are a part of the penal code of Islamic law, which is known as Shariah. And 84% of Muslims in South Asia, 77% in Southeast Asia, 74% in the Middle East and North Africa, and 64% in Sub-Saharan Africa support Sharia as the law of the land. Less drastic, yet significant percentages are to be found even among Muslim communities in the West. So too, most of the world's Muslims believe that any acts of violence against Israel, including suicide bombers in buses and restaurants, are justified. Now, does any of this sound moderate to you? Yet, if anyone raises these inconvenient truths here in the West, he is sure to be called an Islamophobe, a hater of Islam. Again, my own story is instructive. In February of 2015, I was yelled at, cursed at, and successfully prevented from speaking at Swarthmore College by students and others who did not agree to what I was saying. Some of them were Muslim women who fit the image of the unveiled, perfect English-speaking moderate Muslim young woman. Other seeming moderates tried and failed to do the same during my speech at Temple University the next day. Some of them, sadly, were students of journalism. It is not Islamophobic to note the tragic fact that at this time in history, the Muslim world is dominated by bad ideas and bad beliefs. That is why millions of so-called moderate Muslims do not rise up to denounce Islamic terror. Because the word moderate, as we understand it, does not really apply. If moderation means you tolerate freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, women's rights, and gay rights, moderate Muslims are a distinct minority. Of course they exist, millions of them, but among believing Muslims, they do not represent anywhere near a critical mass. The values of the West and the values of Islam, as practiced in the Muslim worlds of the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, and more in Europe, are not compatible. Western politicians can deny this, but this denial does not change the reality. It is these bad ideas and beliefs that provide the soil in which radical Islam grows. Ignoring this only prevents us from effectively fighting Islamist terror.
Now let's deal with another term. We hear a lot these days about migration, migrants. Well, that's not the proper word for it. Islam has a term for migration, and it's called hijrah. It is so important that their calendar is based on hijrah. And what is hijrah? The time that Muhammad left Mecca and went to Medina. Now think about that. That's a little odd, isn't it? Because you would think that the beginning of the Islamic calendar would begin with the birth of Muhammad or the birth, or at the time of the first revelation of the Quran. But nope, it's based on moving to Medina. Why? Because that marked the beginning of success. So if you want to discuss Islam and people moving around, coming into your country, call it hijrah, not migration. Now then, here's a cranky word called Islamophobia. What does Islamophobia mean? Notice that no one ever really defines the term. They just say, oh, you're bad, you're an Islamophobe. I've been called an Islamophobe more than once. So I give a little thought as to what it means. Islam is Sunnah and Quran, so if we're phobic, we have to be phobic about the Sunnah, phobic about the Quran, or one or the other. The Quran says to kill the kafir and hate the kafir. The kafir is a filthy person. Well, the Sunnah includes beheadings, assassination of artists and intellectuals, mass executions, deception, and fighting in Allah's cause. So let me ask you a question. Is it psychotic, phobic to be afraid of jihad, assassination, and executions? I don't think so. I think it's Islam fearful, but not Islamophobia. Why is fear of harm called bigotry? Because that's what they mean when they call me names like Islamophobe. They say basically you're a bigot. Well, if I'm afraid of being assassinated, is that bigotry? Let's use another word here, jihad, not terror or violent extremism. Let's get this straight. A jihadi is not a terrorist. A jihadist is jihadist. Guess what? Now, the word is 1,400 years old. It's what's in the Sunnah. It's what's in the Quran. So why do we want to avoid using it? It's not an insult. Jihadists call themselves jihadists. Now, let's cover this real quickly. There are 4 kinds of jihad. Jihad of the sword, which is the only one that gets written up in the papers. There is jihad of pen and speech, jihad of money, and jihad of inner struggle. Now Muslims always like to, our jihad is a spiritual struggle, like my jihad is reaching across the aisle to other people. Well, let's break this down. 21% of Bukhari's hadith are about jihad. 98% of the hadiths that are about jihad are about killing kafirs. Only 2% of the jihad hadiths are about religious struggle. So, is jihad inner struggle? Yep, 2%. But 2% on a test won't pass in my course, particularly when 98% of the jihad hadiths are about killing kafirs. So, jihad is struggle. Jihad does not mean terror. Jihad does not mean holy war. Jihad is a systemic doctrine. It is not offensive to use what's found in the text. Jihad is a complete civilizational war. Jihad is what made Islam successful. It's global, it's eternal. Jihad is the right word. Hijrah, migration, is a form of jihad. There's been 548 battles that I've tabulated that have been fought between Islam and classical civilization. Over 1,400 years, that's 60 million Christians, 10 million Buddhists, 80 million Hindus, and 120 million Africans for a total of 270 million in what I call the tears of jihad. The Muslims who killed 270 million called it jihad. Why don't we call it jihad as well? Now, terror is a tactic, so we can use terror, but don't confuse jihad and terror. Radicalization, have you heard that? Well, what is radicalization? Well, it turns out when you listen to social scientists and psychologists, they can't really explain it to you, except the radical is dangerous. Radicalization is simply following the Quran of Medina and the jihad hadiths. A radical is someone who is obeying all of Islamic doctrine. Now we get to another weird concept, which is you need to de-radicalize. Now, how do you understand something and not at all and then attempt to change it? How do you de-radicalize without understanding what radical means? How do you persuade a Muslim not to follow all of Islam? Let's say you have a fighter from Islamic State. He's been trained in the Quran of Medina, and you come along and say, well, we don't want you to be dangerous. We want to de-radicalize you. We don't want you to follow the Quran of Medina. And he will be like, what? Are you crazy? That's the best part of the Quran. Here's another word we use that's wrong. A suicide bomber. Suicide is a sin and you go to hell. Martyrdom in jihad is the highest form of Islam and you go straight to heaven. Got that? Suicide goes to hell, martyrdom goes to heaven. So use the right word. They're a martyr. They're not a suicide bomber. Now let's cover some of Islamic terms that they use when they're talking to us, and let's get the real meaning of them. They have their own deceptive naming. Here's one. There's a terror event, a jihad event, and we call for peace, says the Imam. Now what does he mean by peace? Well, everybody knows what he means by peace, right? Wrong. In Islam, peace comes only after the Shariah is in place. So when the Imam says we call for peace, he means we want Shariah. Another one they say, we call for justice for all innocent people. Are you aware that justice only comes from the Shariah? So when he calls for justice, he's calling for Shariah. And you know who's innocent? No kafir is innocent. Why is a kafir not innocent? Because they deny the truth of the prophethood of Muhammad, which is the primary sin in Islam. So therefore, if you're a kafir, you're not innocent, and if you're a kafir, you're not included in the call for justice.
By my lights, thinking that the Quran is the best book ever written on any subject, really, is getting you pretty close to derangement. Thinking that that someone should be killed for criticizing it, or that it's a real problem that cartoonists caricature the Prophet Muhammad and they should be kidnapped. That this is the kind of treading upon the sanctities of the religion is a real social problem that demands more energy in its criticism than suicide bombing. That, I think, is a kind of derangement that is immensely widespread, and we shouldn't minimize it. The thing, however, the thing I don't know, and which is a place where I think Reza and I will actually have a meeting of the minds, is I don't know. I mean, it's perfectly clear to me that my style of conversation is not what can be broadcast to the Muslim world to change people's minds. I mean, that is your job. You are much better suited for that job. And I would agree with you that in order to empower the moderates of the Muslim world, drawing cartoons of the Prophet and writing paragraphs of the sort I've written is not a strategy. I'm not a diplomat. And I don't know, but what's troubling me is I don't know where the line is between encouraging moderation, representing what Islam could be. You know, Islam could be a religion of peace, perhaps. Jihad could be just an inner spiritual struggle and have nothing to do with holy war. Indeed, that we have to raise a generation of Muslims who believe those things. But pretending that it is already is problematic, because it isn't for so many millions of Muslims. And it may be that if you pretend hard enough, in fact, you become what you pretend to be. And maybe that's part of the process. But I think we have to admit to ourselves that we are confronting the behavior of a death cult among millions and millions of Muslims, not 10,000 who went to training camps in Afghanistan. We are confronting an endorsement of this kind of behavior and a reflexive political solidarity where Muslims side with other Muslims, no matter how sociopathic their behavior, simply because they're other Muslims. we can't deny the problem while trying to encourage a more benign face of the religion.
Islam has a concept of civilizational war that beats all other doctrines of war. It certainly beats our doctrine of war, which usually just considers it kinetic warfare, that is, bullets and bombs. Now, if you want to oppose us on the battlefield, we do great, but unfortunately this war is being fought in ways other than bullets and bombs. Islam has an ability to work in groups. This is wonderful because they get more done. We, on the other hand, have an individual and we don't get as much work done. Muslims meet frequently, locally, and across the nation. Why? To plan their civilizational war. You see, they're here to win. They believe in long-range strategic planning. The Muslim Brotherhood Explanatory Memo is a work of extraordinary genius. It covers generational planning and a breadth of war that we don't even comprehend. Take this as an example, General Stanley McChrystal's battle plans in Afghanistan. There's no mention of Islam, no mention of jihad, and no mention of Muslims. Well, good luck on making that work in a country like Afghanistan. Now let's talk about textbooks. They're also used in civilizational war. In the 7th grade in Tennessee, you will learn that Islam was the golden age, was the high point of civilization, that women were given their rights first by Islam, the first constitution came from Islam, and that Islam cares for the Jew and the Christian and takes care of them. These things are only at best half true, but little Tennesseans will grow up believing this. Then we have Shariah finance, a brilliant plan where money is taken from our civilization and put into the civilizational war to tear us down. If you're an individual and want to do what I do, good luck on getting any money. But if you're a Muslim and want to do what I do, money will be there. If I were a Muslim and decided to run for the Congress of the United States, I would have all the money I needed. I sat in a mosque in Southern California and watched as $20,000 was raised from about 50 people. And it was for the stated purpose of civilizational war, lawfare. They were generous. They're quite generous. You see, Muslims want to win, and we just want a tie. We want everybody to like us. Go to a bridge building event inside the religious community and you'll discover that the rabbis and the Christian clergy, they're there just to be nice and pleasant, whereas the imam is there to score points. He knows Christianity and he knows Judaism, and he uses that knowledge well. They teach their young dawah, that is, how to preach the gospel of Islam to the young Christians and others they meet in school. I don't know of any church that prepares its young people to try to convert Muslims. There's no opposition within the church or the synagogue to what I call the love jihad, which is when Muslims seek out Christians and Jewish girls to marry them and have Muslim babies.
Has anyone heard about Islam lately? I love that. I ask that all the time. Actually, you probably haven't heard as much about Islam as you think you have. You understand it, and so when you hear things going on in the world and Muslim countries, all of this murder and mayhem and violent religious bigotry and anti-Semitism and anti-Christianism and homophobia, suppression of women, and the most cruel and sadistic type of murders that they keep thinking up all the time, all done in the name of Islam by religious Muslims, and they quote their sacred texts in order to support this. But of course, that is not reported by the media. We know it's Islam, but they don't, or at least they're not telling us. And so what we want to do tonight is I want to do two things. I want to explain to you in sort of a nutshell the logic of Islam, and so that you can then take this knowledge and give it to others. Because, folks, we are losing the war, and we're losing it because we don't have enough people on our side. And this is kind of strange. You would think it'd be natural, given the nature of Islam and the nature of America, that we should have a natural reaction. Everybody in the United States should have a natural reaction against Islam, pretty much like we had against communism, only even worse. But it's not happening. And what I want to do tonight is show why it's not happening, and then when you understand why it's not happening, you can use that knowledge to talk to others, because we've got to get other people on our side. And so I want to explain to you the logic of Islam in a way that you can explain it to others, and then I want to motivate you to explain it to others. When you go home tonight, if you don't tell other people and share with them what you're learning tonight, if you don't do that, we're going to lose. We have to become active. Consider yourself in a way to be missionaries. You have to go spread our message. Because if nobody spreads the message, it's not going to get spread. And the media is against us. And of course, to the extent that the Muslims have control of the media, and they do, they are against us. They don't want the message spread either. So please, definitely go out and spread the message to others. It is crucially important to do that. And I'll explain some ways that you can do that at the end. Now, logic. I entitled this The Logic of Islam. When I told one of our activist friends from New York that this was the title of my talk, he said, "Logic? There is no logic in Islam." But he's wrong. There is. There is a logic in Islam, and both Muslims and non-Muslims are imprisoned by it. They can't break that logic. If you believe in Islam, you can't defeat the logic. And that's what we need to understand and to get other people to understand. Now the question is, why don't people understand this? Well, there are barriers, linguistic barriers, semantic barriers that prevent them from understanding it, and I want to deal with those tonight especially. We need semantic clarity. You know, there was a philosopher of science, I don't know whether you remember his name or maybe you never heard of him, Hans Reichenbach, wrote an excellent book called The Rise of Scientific Philosophy. And on the very first page, he says something really very profound, that the analysis of error begins with the analysis of language. And the reason is that we perceive reality through words. And if we don't have a clear definition of the words, if the words are fuzzy, our perception of reality is fuzzy. And I believe that that is what is going on and why we are unable to communicate our message as we should communicate it to the rest of our fellow citizens. The first major misunderstanding when it comes to dealing with Islam is the word Islam. Now, you all know that it means submission, but we're not talking about the etymological definition. Islam is usually taken to mean one or more of many things. It could be the history of Muslims in Islamic countries. It could be the various cultures in the world of Islam. It's the way Muslims behave. But first and foremost, we need to consider Islam to be the Quran and Muhammad. It's that simple. It's the belief system. And the problem with understanding that people have is that they confuse the belief system with people, Muslims. Muslims can behave in any which way, but the belief system does not change. And so when we talk about Islam, and we need to get this to other people when we talk about them, is that Islam, when we say Islam, we mean the Quran and Muhammad. And that's it. And this has very serious consequences in the sense, the following sense. Well, first let me back up just a second. You're all perhaps familiar with certain moderate Muslims like Tariq Fatah, right? He came out with a statement in an article, oh, not long ago. He says, the title of his article was, "Here's the Real War Within Islam." What did he mean by that? When he uses the word Islam, he's not talking about the Quran and Muhammad. There is no war about that, unfortunately. He's talking about the world of Islam. There are Muslims who are against and for jihadism, but he, like other moderate Muslims, never talk about the Quran and Muhammad. And there's, of course, the celebrity moderate Muslim everybody knows, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who wrote his autobiography entitled Battle for the Soul of Islam. Now, he didn't mean battle for the soul of the Quran and Muhammad. He never talks about the Quran and Muhammad. He's talking about Muslims as people. Some are violent and some are not violent. So he's also conflating the belief system with the people. We need to stop doing that. We need to talk only about the belief system. And the reason why that is so important is because it's the belief system that is taught in all of the mosques. So the belief system will always produce a great number of Muslims who take it seriously. And that's why we have to when we talk about Islam, let everybody know that what you're really talking about is the Quran and Muhammad. Now, everybody knows that there are moderate Muslims, obviously, but there is no such thing as moderate Islam. And we need to make that clear to people also. Islam is the Quran and Muhammad, and it cannot be either moderate or immoderate. In fact, there's this very famous saying by Erdogan from Turkey, who said there's no such thing as moderate Islam, that the very concept is ugly. Islam cannot be either moderate or immoderate. It is what it is. Islam is Islam, and that's it. Well, this is one of the strongest leaders, Muslim leaders in the world. He knows what he's talking about. What is he referring to when he says Islam can be neither moderate nor immoderate? Well, he's obviously referring to the Quran and Muhammad, the belief system. He didn't say so, but that's it. Because Muslims as people, they can be moderate, they can be peaceful, but those are the ones who are not following the Quran and Muhammad. There's another quotation by a former leader of the Council on American Islamic Relations, Bassem Khafagi, who said, "I was the first to expose the notion of so-called moderate Islam," he put it in quotes, which is used as a means to canonize a non-Islamic Islam. Now get that, a non-Islamic Islam. What in the world is that? Well, what he's talking about with Islamic, he means the Quran and Muhammad. And so a non-Islamic Islam would be Muslims who practice Islam without following the directives in the Quran and Muhammad. That's what he's talking about. And so he says this so-called moderation means a violation of the laws of Islam. So that is pretty clear. He's talking about the belief system. And that's why when we talk to people, we have to be very clear that we're talking about the belief system and not how Muslims behave or don't behave. Now, moderate Islam then is really nothing more than a deviation from Islam, Islam being the Quran and Muhammad. You're all familiar with Bosch Fawston, I assume. He's the cartoonist who won the prize in the Draw Muhammad cartoon contest. He came out with a very good statement the other day. He said that moderate Muslims, the main thing that otherwise impotent moderate Muslims do for Islam is that they discourage otherwise honest and knowledgeable people from condemning Islam. Again, Islam being the Quran and Muhammad. And so these moderate Muslims create false hopes in people that they represent a viable form of Islam, the belief system, when they don't even talk about the belief system. And of course, they don't represent any viable form at all. They are, in fact, rejected by their Muslim communities. Both Tariq Fatah and Zuhdi Jasser have told us that they have no support in the Muslim communities, because what they are vaguely advocating, without actually saying it specifically, is a reform of the Quran and Muhammad, and of course they can't do that. And in fact, I remember a debate that Dr. Jasser had with the imam of a mosque in Tempe, and it started out where the imam asked Dr. Jasser, "Do you believe that the Quran is Allah's literal word?" And Jasser said, "Yes, of course." That was the end of the debate. There's nothing more to debate after that. If you're not going to question the Quran, there's nothing more to debate. Now, if you turn to page 2 in your handout for a moment, let's talk about that. You see a triangle. It's kind of a schematic version, how to divide up the Muslim community. This is the version that we are all given by the media. At the top, you've got this tiny minority of violent extremists, as they're called, and that, of course, includes those organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria, the Taliban, and so on. And then, presumably, everybody else below that tip of the triangle, everybody else is presumably moderate, because they're not going around blowing people up, shooting them and cutting their heads off and immolating them and crucifying them and what else. And so people who don't do that are considered to be moderates by the ignorant non-Muslims. The problem with that politically correct division of the Muslim community, we will then see on page 3. You look at the diagram on page 3. Considering all of these non- or unviolent Muslims to be moderate blinds us to the hundreds of millions of Muslims who share the same goals as the violent extremists, namely the establishment of a worldwide Islamic empire called the Caliphate. Same goals. Their methods of going about it are different depending on the conditions. The Muslims as minorities in non-Muslim countries cannot afford to be violent because they would be crushed. And so they go about their subversive actions, infiltrating the institutions. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this is what we have to get across to people, that these so-called moderate Muslims are not moderate at all, the ones that they think are moderate, simply because they're not cutting people's heads off. The entire Muslim Brotherhood is the middle part of the triangle, but they are as aggressive, just not as violent as the rest of them. In fact, the violent extremists are all offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, there are lots of conservatives who have been infected by the diagram on page 2. Among them are Dennis Prager even. All these people are on our sides, but they will not acknowledge that Islam itself is the problem. They think that, well, political Islam or militant Islam and so on, we'll be talking about those terms in a minute. Dennis Prager's only one. Hugh Hewitt, Bill O'Reilly, Megyn Kelly, Michael Medved. Just last week, Michael Medved had on his show, I don't know whether anyone heard that, this woman, Karen Armstrong, who's a first-class liar and propagandist for Islam, who said on his show that there's nothing in the Quran which would justify what the extremists are doing, the violent extremists. And he didn't have the knowledge to contradict her. The fact that he had her on the program in the first place showed that he did not understand what Islam was all about. You're all familiar, of course, with what Ben Carson said about Islam a few weeks ago, that Islam is not compatible with our Constitution, not compatible with democracy. Michael Medved was one of the first people to attack Carson for saying that. So we have to get to these conservative journalists. I don't know what their email addresses are or their Facebook. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a way of getting to them and explaining to them the chart on page 3 is the accurate division here, and that Islam itself is the problem. Has anyone read Glenn Beck's new book? Remember the title? It is, in capital letters, it is about Islam. That was very brave of him to do that, because the title alone tells us the nature of the problem. It is about Islam. It is not about various types of Islam. Again, Islam is the Quran and Muhammad. And so that's what it is all about, because that's where the entire problem comes from.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace to you all. My name is Saba Ahmed. I'm a law student at American University. I am here to ask you a simple question. I know that we portray Islam and all Muslims as bad, but there's 1.8 billion Muslim followers of Islam. We have 8 million plus Muslim Americans in this country, and I don't see them represented here. But my question is, how can we fight an ideological war with weapons? How can we ever end this war? The jihadist ideology that you talk about, it's an ideology. How can you ever win this thing if you don't address it ideologically?
Great question. I am so glad you're here, and I am so glad you brought that up because it gives us an opportunity to answer. What I find so amazing is since the beginning of this panel, which we are here about Benghazi attack against our people, not one person mentioned Muslims. We are here against Islam, or we're launching war against Muslims. We are here to discuss how 4 Americans died and what our government is doing. We were not here to bash Muslims. You were the one who brought up the issue about most Muslims, not us. And since you brought it up, allow me to elaborate with my answer. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Of course, not all of them are radicals. The majority of them are peaceful people. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25% according to all intelligence services around the world. That leaves 75% of them peaceful people. But when you look at 15 to 25% of the world Muslim population, you're looking at 180 million to 300 million people dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. That is as big of the United States. So why should we worry about the radicals, 15 to 25%? Because it is the radicals that kill. Because it is the radicals that behead and massacre. When you look throughout history, when you look at all the lessons of history, most Germans were peaceful. Yet the Nazis drove the agenda. And as a result, 60 million people died. Almost 14 million in concentration camps. 6 million were Jews. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Russia, most Russians were peaceful as well. Yet the Russians were able to kill 20 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at China, for example, most Chinese were peaceful as well. Yet the Chinese were able to kill 70 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Japan prior to World War II, most Japanese were peaceful as well. Yet Japan was able to butcher its way across Southeast Asia, killing 12 million people, mostly killed with bayonets and shovels. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. On September 11th in the United States, we had 2.3 million Arab Muslims living in the United States. It took 19 hijackers, 19 radicals to bring America down to its knees, destroy the World Trade Center, attack the Pentagon, and kill almost 3,000 Americans that day. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. So for all our powers of reasons and us talking about moderate and peaceful Muslims, I'm glad you're here. But where are the others speaking out? And since you are the only Muslim representative, applause till the end. Thank you. Thank you. And since you're the only Muslim representative in here, you took the limelight instead of speaking about why our government, and I assume, are you an American? You're an American citizen. So as an American citizen, you sat in this room and instead of standing up and saying a question or asking something about our 4 Americans that died and what our government is doing to correct the problem, you stood there to make a point about peaceful, moderate Muslims. I wish you brought 10 with you to question about how we can hold our government responsible. It is time we take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs and stop calling it fair.
And there will be refreshments afterward.
Baby secret. She whispers just to you.
Allahu Akbar.